Hello, my name is John Contreras, and this is my project for Bio 121 Web. This assignment is my deep dive assignment, in which I'll explore deeply on a specific topic. With that, let me get into this video. Today, I'll be answering what were the biological effects of the Black Plague on the human body. First, we need to start off with explaining what the Black Plague even is. And I would like to mention that the Black Plague also has many other names. It can sometimes be known as the bubonic plague or the Black Death. So, what is the Black Death? According to the Cleveland Clinic's article, Bubonic Plague, Black Death, they state that the bubonic plague is an infection spread mostly to humans by infected fleas that travel on rodents. Called the Black Death, it killed millions of Europeans during the Middle Ages. Prevention does not include a vaccine, but does involve reducing your exposure to mice, rats, squirrels, and other animals that may be affected. According to PubMed, they suggest rodents like the black rat were the main carriers of the infected fleas. So, it is a disease and is considered a plague, but what even is a plague? Plagues come in different forms. There is the bubonic plague, septicemic plague, and the pneumonic plague. Referencing the same Cleveland Clinical article, it states, plague is an infectious disease caused by a specific type of bacterium called Yersinia pestis. White pestis can affect humans and animals and is spread mainly by fleas. In order to really understand the effects of the plague, let's dive deep to what it actually is and what it can do. So, we know it is transmitted by fleas and small mammals. But what does it do to the host once transmitted? According to the World Health Organization's article on plagues, they state, plague bacillus, white pestis, enters at the bite and travels through the lymphatic system to the nearest lymph node where it replicates itself. The lymph node then becomes inflamed, tense, and painful and is called a bubo. At advanced stages of the infection, the inflamed lymph node can turn into open sores filled with pus. Pus is like a thick liquid that is usually inside or also on the infection, usually colored white, yellow, or even green. Bubonic plague can advance and spread to the lungs, which is a severe type of plague called pneumonic plague. So, all in all, a very dangerous thing that has severe effects on its host. Now that we know what the bubonic plague is and what it did to humans, let's understand how an infection like this even spreads. From the CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, germs are everywhere. Germs are tiny microorganisms that can cause disease, from it being in the air, from it being in the water, and it being inside our bodies. Germs can be both helpful and harmful, in which the good germs can be inside our bodies with no issues, while the bad ones obviously cannot. Germs can evolve, group together, and reform in someone's body. Many of them deal with specific symptoms and lead to permanent effects of the person's body and organs. The CDC states people can be sick with symptoms of an infection or colonized with germs, not have specific symptoms of an infection, but be able to pass the germs to others. So, to explain this, the spread of germs between one person to another is the main way something like an infection or disease can spread. Specifically, germs depend on the environment and people to move around. They come into contact with other organisms in many different ways. It ranges from things like physical touch, inhaling, sprays, splashes, and etc. When it does finally come into contact with the organism, it becomes a breeding ground for diseases and other bacteria to start growing. So, that is how diseases spread. Now, let's take a look at the history of the Black Death and how it ended up spreading so rapidly. The Black Death was an impactful pandemic that affected Europe, the Mediterranean, and other parts of continents around them. It killed over 25 million people, which is about a third of the European population at the time. This left a mark in history, going down as one of mankind's worst pandemics. In Max Barnhart's article, scientists say they solved a 700-year-old mystery where and when Black Death began. He states, new research published this month in the journal Nature provides biological evidence that places the ancestral origins of Black Death in Central Asia and what is now modern-day Kyrgyzstan. With things like the rise of trade and the increase of exploration, the disease spread was bound to happen. Because it was unknown, most people ended up passing it towards others without even realizing they had some type of plague. This specifically mainly happened towards the beginning stages of the plague. As people began to travel all over due to different reasons, the diseases spread rapidly across different countries. Bringing up a quote from Phil Slavin, who was a co-author on the paper and a historian at the University of Stirling in Scotland, who has also received a PhD in medieval history from the Center for Medieval Studies at the University of Toronto. He states, researchers find that the strain from this region gave rise to the majority of modern plague strains circulating in the world today. This evidence further shows how rapid and how much this disease actually spread around the world, specifically towards Europe and the other continents around it. At first, the Black Death was started in a small area. With how easy it can spread, it ended up moving all across these continents. With how popular trade between countries both by sea and by land got, it was no doubt that the spread of the Black Death was going to occur at some point and at some time. To get into the specifics of where and how it ended up spreading, using a source from Britannica's Black Death, it affected areas like North Africa, Italy, Spain, France, Austria, Hungary, Switzerland, Germany, and the other Low Countries. From the article written by John Martin named The Black Death, The Plague 1331 to 1770, he states, in October 1347, a ship came from the Crimea and Asia and docked in Messina, Sicily. Aboard the ship were not only sailors, but rats. The rats brought with them the Black Death, or also known as the bubonic plague. Reports that came to Europe about the disease indicated that 20 million people had died in Asia. Although we have an idea where the bubonic plague affected, we really don't know the origin specifically or how it even came to be. But researchers have a good prediction/idea on it. Overall, the Black Death was deadly, killing millions and many populations of different countries all across Europe and the Mediterranean. So, we explained where it ended up spreading and how deadly this plague really was, but what was its effects on the human population? I'll explain its effects both short-term and long-term, along with the biological effects in the human body caused by the bubonic plague. If you contracted the Black Death, in the span of a couple days, you would experience symptoms like fevers, vomiting, headaches, body pain, swollen marks, and eventually death. According to PubMed, a study was done to see the correlation between age and mortality of the disease. They came to the conclusion that, in their words, the risk of mortality during the Black Death increased with adult age. These were some examples of the overall effects of the disease. But how does it affect our future, and how did it end up affecting us biologically? Well, there is actually a lot of what the Black Plague actually ended up doing to our genes and the way we humans evolved over time. To explain what a gene actually is, I will quote what the National Human Genome Research Institute said on their article, Gene. The gene is considered the basic unit of inheritance. Genes are passed from parents to offspring and contain the information needed to specify physical and biological traits. Most gene codes for specific proteins or segments of proteins which have differing functions within the body. With that, I would like to bring up the fact that some humans were able to deal with the disease better than others. According to Pat Shipman, DeWitt established age at death from skeletal indicators of maturity and sex. She also documented the location and frequency of various bony and dental lesions that indicated poor health, malnutrition, or other causes of frailty. She also found that other individuals and those with significant signs of frailty were at higher risk of dying of the plague than their peers. Due to the way the Black Death affected human populations, humans were actually able to evolve over time to be able to withstand the disease. In a way, human beings went through an evolutionary adaptation, which is basically where an organism adjusts to their environment, and over time, as in decades or even centuries, their body starts to form in ways where they've improved their survival chances. This can be either physical or biological. An example of this is the different types of breeds of birds in the world, and how different birds have different beak shapes to adjust surviving time in nature. This little process practically occurred inside us. It is like our bodies getting used to a sickness, and how when you first get it, it's pretty severe, but over time your body adjusts to it. Over time, us humans eventually evolved to learn to face varieties of diseases. Since sometimes diseases only occur in certain locations, it causes different populations of people to have certain genes that can help them fight against these diseases. For example, Elizabeth Hennessy explains in her article, Black Death Left a Mark on Human Genome, in which she states, "This is why events like the Europeans first coming to the Americas caused such a mass killing towards other populations, in which in that case, many Native Americans died due to the Europeans bringing many diseases they have never encountered before." To further explain what genes were specifically affected and changed, Hennessy also states, "Those genes included one for skin pigmentation, one involved in inflammation, and one associated with susceptibility to autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis. But the ones like Natea and Bertrand-Petit were most excited about were a cluster of 3 immune system genes found in chromosome 4. These genes code for toll-like receptors, proteins which latch onto harmful bacteria in the body and launch a defensive response. The Black Death overall left a mark on human genome, specifically causing a change in the human genome for those generations who received the disease in the past. These changes may also help explain why some Europeans react differently from other people to some diseases and have some susceptibilities to autoimmune disorders. This overall just shows that the Black Death has most likely left a mark on human genomes of certain populations, specifically the Europeans, giving Europeans more susceptibilities to modern variants of the disease, giving them a better chance at fighting the disease more successfully. We actually have physical evidence of DNA samples of bones identifying genes that protect the host by the Black Death. According to Alison Caldwell's article named "Ancient DNA Shows People with Certain Genes Were Most Likely to Survive the Black Death," she states, scientists examined ancient DNA samples from the bones of over 200 individuals from London and Denmark who died before, during, and after the Black Death plague swept through the region in the late 1340s. Using targeting sequencing for a set of 300 immune-related genes, they identified 4 genes that, depending on the variant, either protected or increased susceptibility to white pestis. One of these variants are named, and bear with me, RS254944794. PubMed states, "It is associated with the production of a full-length versus truncated ERAP2 transcript, variation of cytokine response to white pestis, and increased ability to control intracellular white pestis and macrophages." Although this evidence seems very complicated, to basically sum it up, it just shows that some humans were able to adapt to the disease and learn to fight against it. According to Brian Doctorow, we actually have enough results from different experiments to suggest that the Black Death ended up influencing the evolution of the human immune system, in which, if you do not know what the human immune system does, it basically protects our bodies from diseases and infections, so it is kind of like our life support shield. With that, I would like to get on to how the Black Death affects us today. With support from the CDC, the Black Death is still around today, but it's pretty rare to find. It is mainly around the rural areas of the western United States and mainly occurs in specific parts of Africa and Asia. It is still fatal, even with the help of certain antibiotics, but it is really rare. With this, it's easy to conclude how easy it is to survive the Black Death compared to back then. The survival rate from the disease back in the day was very scarce, but now, as medicine improves over time, the survival rate also does. All in all, you have a general idea of what the Black Death is, what it did, and how it eventually affected us biologically and physically. Most likely in the future, we'll get to learn more of the disease and its origin. And that is all for my deep dive project. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching.